Hi, this is Teri. This is the Historical and Heritage Society. Today we're at the home of Don and Nancy Elisburg. Thank you so much for inviting us here. The views are spectacular. We're going to learn a lot about Key Biscayne. Thank you again for inviting us to your lovely home. How did you first find Key Biscayne? When did you move here?
I knew about Key Biscayne because my family had lived in Miami Beach during the 1940s. Key Biscayne became a visiting place for the children. Yeah, when they built the causeway, when they opened it, that was also when they put in the zoo merry-go-round. That's what we knew about Key Biscayne. Flash forward, mostly coconuts, and I think it's important to remember that the housing in Key Biscayne, which are now the single family left, that was housing for basically middle income people.
Don was born in 38. The family lived down here for about 5 or 6 years, so he went to elementary school down here. This is in the middle of 40s. These men were being trained. This is where they were stationed before they went off to the war. He's about 6 here. Don became friendly. They made him a mascot for this picture, and they gave him a uniform. It was during this time when he talked about coming to Crandon Park for the zoo and the train and the merry-go-round. Then when they reopened the merry-go-round, and most of the people who were there were people who had been there before. So they were either in our age group or young couples who had come as children and were now bringing their children. We bought one of the painted copies of one of the horses.
Where did you come from originally? Where was home for you guys?
Chicago. When we first came to Key Biscayne, we were living in Miami Beach, in the historic section of Miami Beach. If you know where 13th and Collins is,
Sure.
that's where we were living. Then we didn't have much of a thought about Key Biscayne for maybe the next 20, 25 years. And then my aunt and uncle, they had lived in Ohio, Dayton, Ohio. He was with the VA. And then they moved down to Miami Beach for about a year or so when he retired. He'd always wanted to come to Florida. They'd spent Florida on their when they did vacations in wintertime and so forth. We moved into a place, the Roney Plaza Apartments. It's another historical property, turned over, rebuilt or whatever, but it was the still the Roney Plaza. They decided they just didn't like that. I think it was too noisy. I didn't even know what they were doing, and sort of vaguely they were looking around. And one day I got a brochure in the mail that said, "Here's where we're going. What do you think?" They bought this unit in 1971 when they moved in.
That was about the time it was built, wasn't
Yes,
Yes.
they were original owners. I saw the pictures of where they were moving to, and I told my aunt, "Well, what are you going to do about the place that's going to fill in the blank spot here on the view, which is the south building?"
Oh, Commodore South.
Yes, because the other side of it at that point, three-hole golf course and Lord knows what else. Key Colony is right there.
This is Commodore Club East.
Right.
They were really putting in west. But between here, what is now the south, was where the three-hole putting course or golf course was right here. And when Don asked Aunt Florence the question, she told him that he didn't have to worry because they said they're never going to build there.
Can I call you?
They lied. So the Commodore Club space golf course disappeared when they started building the south building. But they left us with this very nice green patch between the three buildings. Don's aunt and uncle had no children, so Don and his brother became their children. In the 70s, when they came down to Florida to live and then eventually bought this place, Don and I were basically newlyweds because we got married in '66. A month after we married, we moved from Chicago to Washington, D.C. area because Don was working at the time for the federal government. He was in the legal department of the Labor Department, and the Washington headquarters wanted him to come to D.C. to work on their War on Poverty program. And then he was part of the group that helped set up the legal department's Civil Rights Division. 67, we had one child. In 70, we had our second child.
At some point when the kids were a couple of years old, this became very convenient to come and visit.
We would often stay at the Sonesta. Our kids would play in the kids' play groups, and we would have time to ourselves. It was really very nice.
Was Judy working there at the Sonesta then?
That I know Judy in, and she
That was the lady on the beach.
she helps with jewelry. But as time went on, everybody got older. Don's aunt and uncle needed help, and so Don and I were the ones that helped them. Don's uncle died about 12 years before his aunt died.
86, 87. I was an attorney starting in the Chicago office. And then I moved to Washington, and I was in one or more of the divisions of the attorney's offices. They had at the time, I don't know, about 150 attorneys in the Washington office, and a lot of departments.
The Labor Department really is the only department that handles workers' issues. That's what we specialized in. He worked for the federal government for 18 years, but he had 9 different jobs. He went from the solicitor's office of the Labor Department to working on the Hill for the Senate Labor Committee. He was there for 7 years and became staff director and general counsel for the committee when OSHA was written and passed. ERISA, the fund program, was written and passed. We actually have pens from the signings of that. And then when Carter came in, he was appointed Assistant Secretary of Labor for Employment Standards. Then he left the government, worked in a private law firm for a while that handled the workers' side of the issues, and then helped run an organization called the Occupational Health Foundation, a group of 12 construction-related unions create a space where health issues for the workers could be handled. So for instance, electricians are exposed to different things, so they help take care of those. Construction workers, something else. Asphalt workers, road builders, something else.
You made a difference.
Don has helped make a difference in a lot of things in his career. When he was Assistant Secretary of Labor, he was appointed as a co-chair of a committee project called the Architectural Transportation Barriers Board. He and the other co-chair were the only people who were not disabled on the committee. People who were on the committee were severely disabled, including people like Max Cleland. And so these are the things that we have today that committee came up with.
That's something to be very proud of. Thank you very, very much.
You have the cutouts in sidewalks for wheelchairs, walkers. You have the textured material in those spaces so that the blind know when they're going from the sidewalk to the street that there's going to be a dip and then back on the sidewalk. pay attention. Elevators go ding to let you know they're going up, and they go ding dong to let you know that they're going down, again for the blind. When they put together the metro system in DC, there's an open space to the track. You have the platform, and then where the open space to the track is going to be the textured material so that the blind know how close they are to the track. In that strip are lights that flash that let the hearing impaired know that a train is coming, because the blind can hear the train coming, but the hearing impaired can't. All of the handles that you don't have to twist with your hand, but you can use your elbow and arm, came out of that.
And out of this committee that you were head of, you did some tremendous strides for this country.
He was also part of the group that made workers' titles gender neutral. So we used to have steward and stewardesses, now we have flight attendant. Policemen, we now have police officer. We used to have firemen, we now have firefighter. We have letter carriers. And if you ask a lot of younger people today if they ever heard of workman's compensation, they actually don't have a clue that it became workers' compensation, because all they've ever heard is workers' compensation. So you can tell what age group people are in.
And this committee, does it still exist today? Or?
It's still wandering around in the Labor Department as a function. After World War II, they needed some kinds of assistance. I think the first one was the President's Committee on the Employment of the Handicapped. Yeah. And that was the actor who, he lost both hands, and he was sort of the chairman of this thing. And he pushed, various things on behalf of the wounded veterans and wounded others, improve their lot in life. Because typically nobody paid attention to them. Now it's a much bigger program. It's nationwide, and it's got lots of high-priced executives on it. But that's the whole idea: is how do you get people with disabilities into the mainstream of employment? I had an assistant who was a young woman. She broke her leg playing tennis or some damn thing. I didn't know much about it. I didn't know anything about it other than they said that she was hurt. And so one morning she came stomping into the office, came pounding into the office in her wheelchair, screaming bloody murder. And how can you allow this to happen? How can you have this to happen? Yeah. And she couldn't get the door open. Then they couldn't do the carpeting. It was thick carpeting, and they couldn't get it to move. Yeah. So we had a redecoration job for a while on that, so she could have a place to work.
In addition to that, when they were putting the metro system in DC, the committee realized that not every station was going to have an elevator. They were all going to have stairways and escalators. So the question the committee asked, what are people in wheelchairs supposed to do, or in crutches, people who can't do that? And the answer was, not a problem. They will let us know ahead of time. They will get off at the stop closest to it that has the elevator. We'll pick them up by bus and we'll take them to the station. And the committee said, no, you won't. You're going to figure out how to put in the elevator.
Yeah,
and
we didn't realize the problems people have, Right. We didn't realize. But thank goodness that you did and your committee did. Let's shift back to Key Biscayne. When you came down and then you were helping your aunt after her husband passed. She lived in this apartment.
Aunt Florence is his father's sister. Uncle Bill is a relative by marriage. On the one hand, we were coming down more often. On the other hand, our son was in college down here and had a car. He really helped a lot, but she was, it was a very typical living style for their age. She did not drive a car. She was very dependent on everybody else. And she had no real understanding of the time that it took to do something. So if she wanted help right now. But if you're in college, you can't just drop in. She had a parking space and didn't drive. She found a friend in the building who didn't have a parking space. So the exchange was that the friend could use Aunt Florence's parking space, but then take her to the grocery store and do other errands. And that worked for a long time, but then the woman didn't really like getting up early, wanted to go to the grocery store at noon, and Aunt Florence wanted to go at... So we actually told her, look, if you want more help from us, you're going to have to move to Maryland. And she decided she really wanted to stay here, so we worked around that. We helped her a lot when Hurricane Andrew hit and this building had damage and she had to move out. Our son picked her up. Actually, our son called Don and said there's a problem because the news says that this hurricane is really going to hit and she won't leave now. She wants to wait. And I told her that if I don't come now, they might not let me on. We were living in Maryland at the time.
When we came in, they were in the process of clearing off the streets and everything up through the causeway. They were shoveling out the streets and the driveways, and this place was where you could barely get through the road complex here because they had bushes and trees and junk all over, and a number of the apartments had interesting damage because the damage was not what you would typically expect, the windows blowing out. The damage to these units was primarily leakage through the windows and through the roof, primarily through the roof. In some areas, different stacks, in some areas they went from 12 to 1. And others was a little less than that. But it took a long time to dry it out.
There was a lot of collection of water here at the front door.
Your front door? Wow.
That's where water collected, and along that back.
Water on this floor?
Yes.
Yes. If it starts at the roof and then it finds its way to the ventilation system, wherever the vents are, is where the water came out. I do not know. I didn't pay attention to other stacks.
Uncle Bill, did he love Key Biscayne?
Yes, it was his choice.
What did he love most about Key Biscayne, or do you remember?
He liked the quiet. As a doctor, he didn't do much practicing down here, but when he did, he was over in one of these buildings for a while. I think he liked the flow. I could see when we visited, in the mornings he would put on his swimming outfit and go downstairs to the pool. The situation was a little different in those early years than later on. There were, for some reason, many more people who used the pool. I think the beach wasn't quite what they wanted. Later on, we've fixed the beach up so that there's more people take the chairs out to the beach. It was a very sociable outfit down, and he came down. My aunt hated the water, hated the pool. She came down once a day to sit with him for a while and then left. But he was very friendly. Yeah.
He was career military in the Air Force. He definitely was the glasses half full person, and she absolutely was the glasses half empty.
You had yin and yang.
she didn't care really visiting with other people. She was just content. Depending upon the weather, she might go down with him at the pool, but
Yeah.
she never went in the water. And that's where she met some friends. She did have some friends in the
Yeah.
building. Somewhere in my collection, I have some letters that she wrote to him explaining what FDR was doing and what was going on and what
Wow.
the news was. She was a very educated person.
And did she have a career? Or?
No,
She worked in one of the University of Chicago operations until they got married, which was in 37 or 38.
Hans' parents met when they were 13, and their whole life when they would go out would be take Florence with you. So
Oh, that's cool.
she was like a flower child, and you just had to take care of her. Her Uncle Bill was younger than Aunt Florence, and that was a no-no then. So one of the cousins of the family in Chicago was a judge, so he was able to get her birth date changed so she could be younger. And once when she was visiting us and had a TIA, and we had to call 911, and they asked her questions, you know, what's your name, where do you live, what's your birthday? She said, my birth certificate says. So we said to the crew, she'll be fine.
The ironic thing is she outlived your uncle.
I mean, she had a very good relationship with our children. I actually have some candlesticks on Uncle Bill's side for a 30th wedding anniversary from 1870 to 1900. And Aunt Florence's aunt, Aunt Dora, came from Russia, participated in the World's Fair, and won the beauty contest.
In Chicago, 1893.
Embroidered her own dress, which has now been, Aunt Florence had it donated to the Chicago Historical Society.
It must have been beautiful.
We actually, they set it up once so that we could go see it and take pictures. And when we took a trip to Russia, St. Petersburg, and we went to their museum,
Yeah.
there was the dress. So, I mean, the
Whoa.
style dress that she was wearing was
Right.
actually very popular at the time.
I was at a cousin's wedding in Chicago, and I was chatting with one of the aunts who was on my father's side, explaining, you know, some of the difficulties we had with Florence and things. And she says, well, you know, Donald, she was always a flower child.
Before it was popular to be a
Yeah,
flower
and this
child.
is an aunt who was 85 or 88
Yeah,
years old
yeah.
at the time. Just bang.
And is the ghost of Florence in here now? Do we feel her?
No, but when Uncle Bill died, the first thing she did was to rip off the Republican sign. She died in '96. All those years that she was living here and we would come down for a visit as we'd drive on the causeway, I would say, I'm never going to live here. This is,
Of course.
I'm not going to be subjected to this.
And they had the drawbridge those days.
In the beginning, it was the
Remember the
drawbridge.
drawbridge?
Yeah.
My aunt was very upset that I did not get admission to the Florida bar. And I told her that I just haven't got the temperament to do another bar admission. I had already done 3, and I just couldn't do it.
So you were Maryland and Washington, D.C.?
and Illinois.
But our life had changed so that we had moved the office into the house because none of the clients were coming to the office. Don was going to them, so why pay the rent? People didn't care if they necessarily had to see Don, as long as they could get answers to their questions. It didn't matter where we were, and lots of times their meetings weren't even in the DC area. They could be down here, they could be in Ohio, and you could fly from here wherever you had to go. He died in 85, 87. When she passed away, we really thought we would either sell it or maybe use it how other friends did, where every now and then you'd come down for 10 days or so. And we also figured out that we could always sell it. We didn't have to sell it right away. We could see how it worked and sell it later on. So the 10-day visit became a month, and then it became a couple of months because it worked. We took the auto train. So we used to tease that if we were in Maryland, there was a bad storm, we'd come to Key Biscayne. If there was a bad storm in Key Biscayne, we'd go to Las Vegas. So things kind of changed. Among other things, in '98, Don had a heart attack when we were here. And it was March, and it was much easier to rehab in the sun than in the other. And we didn't have to do steps and everything. Kind of decided to change Don's career for a while, which was, if you're a lawyer and you have clients, every time a problem comes up, they expect you to take it. And some take longer than others, and you're kind of drowning in work. Yeah. So we decided we weren't going to retire, but we decided we'd call it a timeout. 2 months to do nothing, just clear our heads. 2 months to brainstorm a list of possibility of things that he might do, and then 2 months to see which of those things would work. And I didn't have to go on the Rickenbacker every day. So it became my hideaway. Eventually, we gave up the house. It took Don about 5 years to get me to sell the house and just be here. But
do you remember the places that were on the Key? Like, of course, you came down to visit, Aunt Florence and Uncle Bill, but
yes.
We had, what, 3 grocery stores at one time?
We remember the restaurants where the bank now is. Yes, Linda B's. We used to go to La Coretta a lot. Pharmacy.
Right.
The original pharmacy, the lunch counters.
Yes. That was a popular spot, I understand.
Yes. Aunt Florence and I used to go there for lunch a lot.
And the post office was there, as I remember.
Yeah. Kind of grew on us, and eventually we decided his new career would be a consultant, and we would only agree to do projects, and if it was a small project, we could do several. If it was a big project, we'd only do one. And I said it had to be a balcony project so that Don could work on it when he was sitting out on the balcony. And one day, he had 3 conference calls, and he had breakfast out there, he had lunch out there.
All on the balcony. Did you explain down to your clients, I'm sitting here on my balcony in Key Biscayne?
I think 1 or 2, but
What's that noise I hear in the background, a bird or the surf? Yeah. And how about your children? Do they enjoy coming to Key Biscayne? Do they love it?
Well, our son, who's the older of the 2, came to St. Thomas in a major called Sports Administration.
There are a series of small Catholic universities around the country. Here in Miami area, there's probably 2 well-known. One is St. Thomas and the other is Berry University. I guess for some reasons that they had connections, they decided at St. Thomas to offer this major. Well, that was an interesting thing. He might do that.
From what we could see, almost flunking out of high school because we kept getting potential failure notices.
Oh dear.
We got so many we could have wallpapered his room. And after a while, when the mail came, I just gave it to him and said, you know, you'll have to take care of this. So one of the courses he was failing was photography because he wasn't taking any pictures. He was reading the sports pages and had this epiphany that there's more to a team than the players. So he actually went into the guidance office and picked up a catalog and saw that there was a major called Sports Administration and that it was mostly grad school courses. Very few were undergrad.
Of course.
But he and I were getting along so well that it had to be a school that was at least 3 state lines and 1,000 miles away from me. We said, you're doing so well, we're not taking you on any tour to see what college you want to go to. You get in and we'll take you to see it. So through another long story, which he wound up being accepted down here at St. Thomas. And we didn't, and he knew that he was either going in the Army or a local community college. And he, through the college fair, he struck up a very good relationship with the priest who was explaining the college. And Andy said, you know, I'm smarter than my grades, but the grades are what they are. And he said, do better the first semester of your senior year and send your application to me, and I'll get it in the right hands. A couple of weeks after that, he got a postcard that there was a college fair in D.C. Yeah. The one he had gone to was in Maryland. Yeah. And he said, he wants to see me again, see how serious I am. I said, how do you know that? He said, I know. So I took him to the Metro, and he went downtown, and he came back. And he said, I'm walking down the aisle to St. Thomas's station, and the priest is Father Burke talking to another kid. And as I approached, he said to the kid, and here's the kid that's going to do better his first semester of his senior year. So he said, see, he wanted to see if I was serious. So he gets in early entry.
On probation.
On probation. And he thought that was brilliant. Andy said that was really smart.
Not only that, they gave him a couple of advanced courses also.
Yeah, so then when he showed up to sign up for classes, based on his SAT scores, they wanted him to go into an advanced course. And he took the challenge. He interned with the Miami Heat his senior year of college, which was the first year that they were an expansion team, which was 36 years ago, and today he's their general manager and salary cap. But you can tell him a very long story and he will say, oh, so-and-so didn't want to do that. That was part of the frustration of raising him because he's really very smart and he has a tremendous amount of common sense. I always said to him, look, in the end you'll be fine, but I'd like you to at least start on the 5th floor and not the basement. He's married to his job, and he is in a perfect place for him doing it. And even he amazes himself as to what he's able to do and what he figured out.
We had a different level of understanding of Andy, which was a lot higher than the school, but nonetheless, these guys really did see something in him. Either that or they saw him paying the tuition, one way or another. They were happy to see him.
We pinch ourselves because we're very lucky. Our daughter's a pediatrician in a community health clinic, and she has a fabulous story. The day she was 3, had she been a first child, she would have been an only child because you had to negotiate everything. Were you picking out her clothes to wear for the day, or was she picking them out? She was dressing herself. Were you allowed to be in the room, out of the room, watching her? Realistically, she was planning. She knew what she wanted. She figured out how to get it. The fact that I had no patience for any of those things was totally irrelevant. She was going to become a volunteer with the rescue squad. And one of the reasons was she wanted to see if she could handle blood because she was seriously thinking of becoming a doctor. It's there where she met her husband. She became an EMT. He became a paramedic. When they got married, Nathan was friendly with this former fire chief, collected old equipment. Michelle and Nathan went to his barn, and Michelle got to pick out what was going to be their transportation from the temple to the party. So after a few minutes, she just picked up her skirt, climbed over, put her skirt down. Then she graduated from college and decided that she needed to take 2 years off to clear her head and make sure she wanted to go to medical school. She became a public health associate assigned to CDC and work on a TB drug resistant program. I said to her, "Do you feel safe there?" She said, "They all know that we're with the public health department. We're there to help them. Nobody's going to touch us." We were given advice by somebody to create the Daddy's Taxi Fund. A certain amount of money, and if they're ever in a place where they feel scared, you get a taxi, doesn't matter, Daddy will pay for it. And when you tell your kid about it, they will say, "Oh, Dad, don't be silly." And about 2 weeks after they're gone, you'll get a call, the taxi fund needs more money.
Actually, the advice for it came from one of the doctors in New York who understood what it was to live in New York and have all these problems, and he gave us the advice of putting this fund together because we had never heard about it.
She wanted to have a say in public health, would have more say as a physician than as a public health associate. She volunteers to go to Africa, to go to Kenya, and at the time that she was going, there was a huge upheaval between the military and the government.
Not to go. I said, not me. Not me. They had an opportunity to get a donated incubator and they turned it down. And they turned it down because they said that they had too many babies being born that were going to need it. And they did not want to have to decide who got it and who didn't. Andy said to me when I was really fretting about this, he said, "Look, she already did that, so you can stop being worried about that. Just be worried about what she's going to do next." And when she was in Uganda on that mission, and she discovered that there was a Jewish tribe nearby, they were selling yarmulkes. The design on it is a tree of life. And she's an advocate also for her patients who really don't always have parents who know how to be advocates for them. She's gone on several trips to Israel, active in Jewish women's groups. One is Hadassah with doctors. Her trip got canceled also because the war started. They had to do something, so they set up this volunteer group. So she called me and said, "I know you're not going to like to hear this, but I already have my plane tickets, and today's Friday. I'm going Sunday. Wow. And I'm volunteering. I have no idea what I'll be doing." It's an experience she's absolutely never going to forget. I spent a day picking sweet potatoes because because they didn't want the crops to spoil, and the migrant workers that were doing that farming either became hostages or left
to go back to Thailand.
And interestingly, on one of their trips to Israel, she went with her husband to training of how to deal with mass casualties in an underground facility in Israel. So by the time this war came around, she was pretty well educated as to what it's like with the Israel Defense Force and so forth.
It's fun to watch her raise her children. Interesting to see what Andy is doing as an uncle. We tell both kids to follow your dreams. Just be prepared to live on what your dreams make.
It don't always coincide.
Doesn't mean we won't gift you something if you need it.
You have a story too. You were a school teacher, I understand. You taught school?
I taught the 5th grade
Tough class.
in Evanston, Illinois, right after college. And I really liked Evanston because Evanston only had one high school. So it didn't matter what elementary school you were in because everybody was going to the same high school.
That's nice.
And then when we got married, I went and applied for a job at DC, and I was pretty sure that as a white person, they would take me right away. And I assumed they'd send me to the inner city, which was fine with me. But instead, they assigned me to a school in Georgetown, which I wasn't that happy about, the timing and everything. But it turned out to be perfect because at the time, if your neighborhood school was overcrowded, you could petition and have your kids sent to an underpopulated school. Most of the people in Georgetown sent their kids to private school. The school was small. It had 3 classes, a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 6th, and I was teaching the 5th, 6th. And 90% of my kids were inner city kids whose parents were I really respected, because if the kids had stayed in the neighborhood, they would have walked to school and had free lunch and free breakfast. But by coming to us, the parents had to provide breakfast and lunch, and there were no school buses. The kids came on public transportation, and a few of them, I think, had to transfer to make it. They also came to that school for 3rd and 4th grade, and that teacher hated blacks. Everything was fine until they integrated. And so she and I didn't get along very well, because it took me until November to stand up in front of the class and say 2 + 2 is 99, and somebody had the courage to say, no, that's not right. I mean, she had them so traumatized. So for many of them, I was the first white person who just treated them as a person.
Had you worked with children of color before? Was this a new experience for you?
In that number, yes.
So the schools in Evanston were integrated, sort of.
Well, I was fascinated with what the parents were doing to provide their kids with a class that didn't have 50 kids in the class. If the schools were overcrowded, they might not have 50, but they might have 30 or 35.
I hear you've done some work with Chief Press, that you've involved, because he works a lot with the children in Liberty City and the families.
Oh, yes.
No, well, because of him and the Liberty City, sister city concept, which really intrigued us because of what Don had done professionally and what I had done teaching. And I discovered this nonprofit that called Donors Choose, where teachers send in small grants for projects that they want. And if it's accepted, they get 4 months online to get it paid for. If it gets totally funded, Donors Choose buys the items. So if you're donating to a computer, and it's funded, they're gonna get the computer.
That's beautiful.
If it's not funded in time, you have the choice of transferring your donation to a different project or a gift card to that teacher.
We later found out that this was a fairly favorite organization of Cavella, Dr. Cavella. What we also discovered was that we were focusing on the schools in Liberty City that needed help, which was consistent with what Chief Press was trying to do. And then we found out that Cavella knew about this other program, Donors Choose, because he was relying on them to fund stuff that in any reasonable community should have been paid for out of the school system. It's quite a surprise when we figured that out.
Through Melissa and the Community Foundation, we put up a link to an elementary K through 8 and a high school in the Liberty City area that Chief Press was working with. The chemistry teacher asked for 3 Bunsen burners, chemicals, and glassware. And we helped pay for it. Actually, Andy, I've gotten him interested.
Oh, that's nice.
He finished it off, so they got what they wanted. And most of the schools that are in this program are low-income schools, and the teachers tell you how many students it's going to help. And this was going to help 200 students. Her note says, now the kids can do lab work. That's atrocious. If you've got 200 kids in Liberty City who are signing up to take chemistry, you've got 200 thinking brains there. And for a teacher to ask for something that we would expect to be in any other high school is a crime.
It is.
The biology teacher, which we also helped fund, wanted frogs and rats so that the kids could actually do dissections and not have to just see it on PowerPoints. And we recently helped fund, this drives me crazy. There's a teacher in the high school who's teaching culinary arts. The first thing she wanted and asked for was the materials so that the kids could be certified through that program, which is going to make them more able to get jobs. And the next thing she asked for was a refrigerator and freezer because she couldn't do any cooking with them. And how can you have that course without a refrigerator?
I agree.
And freezer? And she wants it not only to teach them how to cook, but how to wrap things to put in the freezer so that, again, their certification is going to help them more job ready. Now, I don't think college is for everybody, but some advanced education is needed by everybody, and there are a lot of certification programs and a lot of other things that you can get trained for. And actually, as Andy said once, he can understand why the teachers are asking for tablets and laptops and things like that, computers. But when they start asking for paper and pencil, which we've also helped support, from our perspective of what we see for these 2 schools, a headquarters is using an organization like Donors Choose to supply the inner city schools.
But that's wonderful that you're involved with this. How did you find out about it? Was it through the Community Foundation? How did you find out about this?
I may have seen somebody advertising something on Facebook, and it was teachers don't have enough money to buy to supplement all of their schools. So I started looking into it, and it's very interesting. You can look it up by zip code. You can look it up by whatever your interest is. You want to help science projects. You want to help music projects. There are many businesses that match. So for sporting equipment and stuff, Dick's often matches. The Gates Foundation has helped with a lot of computer stuff. One teacher in Montana, it was very cold and she needed winter coats for her kids because the parents couldn't afford them. And then she wanted rubber boots so that the kids could go out and play, because all they came to school with was shoes. So if you get into it and start looking at what the teachers are asking for.
We both went to the Chicago Public Schools. At a time, we weren't dependent on the outside charities to get what I call common teaching materials.
Now the foundation has a link that people can
Yes.
click on. Chief Press, is he involved in this, or you do other things with Chief Press?
Through the first beach party that he had that we went to, we met some really neat young people who were acting as teachers. The men who did the film The Bridge, we've become mentors to them. At our age, which is the 80s, I love being a mentor. I see friends who have become widows and widowers who can't really figure out what to do, and I'm grateful that we have these young people in our life that we can say, okay, you're pregnant, you're going to need a will, and who's going to take care of your kids if something happens to you? One of the young men never really had a father growing up, and he came over to spend a couple of hours with Don to find out what should fathers do, because he was going to become a father.
At this age now, with what we've done over the years, I can appreciate where he's coming from, but it's still, I don't compute it very well, because I don't expect that to be with another set of parents. Having said that, I felt very honored.
Yeah, it was great. But then I told him he should really talk to Andy to find out what worked.
That's true, to ask your son. This home is totally amazing, and there's some very unusual artifacts here. Could you expand and explain what I'm looking at? I see some fire hats, and I see some dolls that look like people. And could you explain what they are?
Key Biscayne used to have an art fair.
Uh-huh.
And there was one woman who had a stall, and she called it Tall Dolls. So Andy, as the heat player, is over there.
Yeah.
And our daughter was a pediatrician, so I asked her to do those, because she personalized it. I mean, she did waiters, she did whatever. So, and I think she had a Celtics players. Yeah. So I came home that night and I said to Don, you know, I want one of those too. So I ordered two, and I gave Andy his. It sat in his office for a long time. Michelle kept hers in the car, so it looked like she wasn't the only driver.
Clever girl.
And then she got married, and he's also a doctor. And then they had 2 children. And this woman was very clever. She said, "Oh, I don't know how to make children. I only know how to make tall dolls." I said, "Oh, well, you're creative. Figure it out." That's Alana. And then when Abby came along, she said, "Well, she's the younger sister. She has to be smaller." So I said, "Well, you figured that out." And so they have the family, and we have the family. It's Michelle and Nathan and Alana and Abby. And I used to have them all on a chair, and Andy was someplace else. Then things got moved around, and they were kind of put there while we were shifting things around. And I said, "You know what? Now it looks like we have company."
It does. The house is very full of happy people. And what about the fire hats?
Well, the fire hats, those we got last weekend. The fire department here is 30 years old. There was an afternoon get-together where they gave people who were being promoted their promotions. And in the evening, they had a party for those who were being retired. So we went to both. And Eric Lang, the fire chief, presented us with those because through the years we've been very vocal about things that they wanted. And Don did a lot of consulting and work with hazardous waste cleanup training. All of the different disciplines, whether you're a firefighter, a police officer, a construction worker, if you're involved in hazardous waste cleanup, the 9/11, all of that is connected with what Don became interested in after working on the OSHA law and the kinds of projects that he worked on since then. So Eric, I don't know how long he was planning that.
Because the one element that he concentrated on was local. He said that I was with them, the fire department, forcing an appropriation for a ventilation system in the firehouse. And I think when they built the firehouse, either they didn't or they didn't know exactly what they needed, or
they needed to upgrade the ventilation system because they have to turn on the trucks twice a day to make sure that they're working. So if they need it in an emergency, they know they can get in the truck and go. And the fumes were getting into the ventilation system and not only affecting the people who were where the engines were, but the people in the offices, or if there were people who were sleeping, you know, if it was a time when they were sleeping.
the kitchens, the whole thing. The numbers that they had was that just wasn't good. It wasn't as best as could be. Each fire truck that they get is twice the size of the ones that they got originally.
That's true.
Because the mechanics have changed over the years.
And for $65,000, they could upgrade the system.
I stood up and yelled long enough that they decided that people in the village council decided that this should not be an issue for them.
You're spending a lot of money on a lot of other things, and this is the health and safety of people.
Of human
and
beings.
Why are you even questioning, is it needed? They put in the state of the art when the building was built. Well, there are a lot of people who don't really understand what firefighters and paramedics and police officers need for the basics and how much they rely on them. They tend to see them sitting around a lot, not doing anything. And so why are you getting that salary? And why are you getting a pension? And people need to understand that when they get paid in two checks. They get their take-home pay and they get their part that goes into the pension. So part of what goes into the pension is their own money. Part of what goes into the pension is what the employers give. And so one council member once told me, since she never had a pension, why should they have a pension? So my answer was, you want a pension? Become a firefighter or a police officer. You'll get your pension, put on your uniform every day, go to work, and maybe you'll come home alive that night.
In the labor department, I tend to get a lot of questions about what to do or how to handle it. One of the programs that we got into very early on when Congress passed the program that provides the training for workers who are cleaning up.
All the Valdez?
Well, it started with that. That was one of my first assignments, to help figure out what the hell happened to these people. So yeah, it's been a stream since Exxon Valdez.
People that were going out to clean up things were not given any gloves, were not given any respirators. They were just given paper towels and were breathing everything.
Well, it was before 9/11. They had lots of people, but they didn't have anybody trained. And so we went up to see what was going on there, and it's a day in my life that I will remember. No matter how you look at it, I will remember.
Both of us do. And you'd go into the metro station and the walls were just wall-to-wall pictures of people. Have you seen so-and-so? Don and another colleague actually went down to the site as they were wound up doing a report on why everybody should have been wearing respirators.
Did you wear a respirator when you went down into the
Actually, I didn't figure out what was going on until I got out of the tour, and that's when we concluded we needed respirators. There was a lot of stuff going on, and it wasn't detectable by the existing equipment. The meters showed everybody was okay, all right?
Yeah, right.
While they were killed. They just didn't register what was in the... It took a while, the health department, the CDC, to concede that they needed to have respirators. And it took almost a long time before the fire department was willing to put respirators on all their people, because their tradition had been, if you can breathe, you don't need a respirator. And for that maybe 100 years of experiences, you couldn't shake it.
And Don and the colleague wrote a report that's actually in the library of the new memorial. The main problem was that the first responders in the fire department in New York City, who were part of the program for hazardous waste training, all died when the building went down. So the follow-up crews did not have that training, and they were emotionally... There was a lot going on at the time. There were too many at the top who didn't want to scare people. So the workers who were involved in the cleanup didn't have protective clothing. They didn't have level 3 respirators. Ron Herbal is a perfect example of somebody who went up there. You know, they were given paper masks, which did nothing, and now we have this big cancer fund to help pay the costs for all of these people. And if you properly train people, depending upon the work that you do, and so that gets involved with the firefighters do their part, police officers do their part, electricians, people who come and do cleanup. You can't just show up and volunteer because your heart's in the right place, but there's going to be consequences. A lot of the unions and junior colleges have programs where the workers are being trained. Somebody was complaining that we have too many people in the police department. If they would just drive around, they could see things that are happening. And I said, it's not how many people are in the department, it's how many people do you have on each shift. Because on any shift, you can have more than one emergency at a time.
That's right.
But you're the second person that called and there's only one truck, you get to wait. At my age, I don't care what you think. If I see something where somebody's going to get hurt, I'm going to speak up. And then if somebody gets hurt and you don't do what I said, it's your fault, not mine, because I told you what needs to be done.
Aren't we lucky here on Key Biscayne to have both of your expertise? You've made a change for the better for Key Biscayne. Is there something that either of you or both of you would like to part with? Because you have made a difference on Key Biscayne, and we thank you for doing all that.
In the end, it's our life experiences that create our philosophy of life as we go through the decades that we're allowed to live. I thank Don all the time that we had the courage to move to DC, because you see things there and are involved in things there. For your life experiences, what's going on in the outside world. I have a legacy up till today. What do I want the legacy to be for the rest of the tomorrows that I'm given? And you can do nothing, or you can do something. And I've kind of zeroed in on, if you're a glasses half full person, there's a lot you can do. If you're a glasses half empty person, you don't care. So you're going to do very little. Many young people today who are living an entitled life, and they're being raised by parents who are also entitled. So that's two generations that we have the potential of losing, of even noticing the things that we see. I'm very grateful to watch my children and grandchildren who picked up the basics of what we strived for, and not often mentioning it. Just they saw us doing it, and now they're doing their things.
I don't really have to say it here, but since we got involved in this, Melissa White, I wanted to say that we have found the way in which that foundation serves its public here to be fascinating and formidable. Because it's at a low level of government, and you get to get the sense of the hands-on and what's gone down. You know the people who are involved. And it gives you a very good feeling about what can be done in this kind of a town, this kind of a place, by the people that endeavor to do it.
Well, you certainly both helped, and Key Biscayne is a better place just for the both of you being here. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for showing up, and thank you for taking the time.